So delighted to be here at Bristol Housing Festival 2020, and I've got with me a very special guest. I wonder if you could introduce yourself.
I am Griffith MBE. I am a CEO of Creative Connects, my own consultancy, University of West of England, Bristol, lecturer, and also author and social entrepreneur.
Thank you, Roger. So, Roger, maybe if you could kick off just by telling us what your relationship with social housing has been, both in terms of someone who's grown up in that space, but also your career in that space.
Well, it's quite strange how my career has kind of fallen in and out of social housing. I see it first and foremost as a safety net and a platform for growth, and safety net in terms of my mum and dad's divorce during the 70s, and coming to Bristol, lived in a ironically named Colston Road at that point. I didn't know who Colston was or who that individual was, but that came back into my life much later on through recent events in the Black Lives Matter. We had a council flat on the 3rd floor in Lawrence Weston. Gave us some security, but it was a 99% white area at that point, so it was a very tough existence. I met a small little lad then as he was, and my mother and his mother became friends. His mother then, that person then went on to be Mayor of Bristol in Marvin Rees. And then on the next phase of my life, in terms of leaving school without any qualifications, living on a housing estate, being burgled during that, a lot of fear, tension, but also camaraderie and coming together from working class communities that helped raise me, and taught values of loyalty and commonality of the cause. Then taking all of those kind of street skills and then turning them into a housing career, literally from nothing, because I left school without any qualifications. I had to re-educate myself. People around me were falling like flies, and by that I mean getting involved in drugs and getting into prison, and a few of my friends aren't with me today who were on that journey. And so that redemptive qualities of social housing turned into a career as a trainee, and working that through to a senior housing manager gave me the bedrock skills into what I do today.
Thanks, Roger. I'm just going to rewind a little bit there in terms of your housing, your first move into housing as a career, because obviously I remember meeting you in the early 90s. At that point, I think you'd been working on the Severn Bridge actually at that point, or on a major construction project. And I remember very early on, one of the things that you just hadn't come across things like a photocopier. So I think that just backs up what you were saying earlier about that alien nature of the office world compared to your background. So going back to what motivated you to look at the positive action program in housing, what was going through your mind when you first were aware that a program like that existed?
Well, that's what I talked about earlier in terms of the redemptive qualities, and very much working at Severn Bridge was cleaning up after welders, and what we did was spot painting. I remember it clearly, sweeping up after them, behind them, and they would spot weld on the joints, and then we would put paint upon there. And hearing the traffic going over me, I knew that I'd probably reached the kind of lowest point that I was going to go, and I knew that I needed to do something. And I remember in the break time I was reading a book from Nelson Mandela, and someone saying to me, "If you can read that, you really shouldn't be here." But there was nothing. There was nothing to take me out of that existence. I couldn't afford to go to college, and I was a young father. I had my own council accommodation, which I inherited from my mother. So that's that pathway, and that gave me that bedrock. So I was a council tenant from age 18. Kind of frightening now when you look at the responsibilities for teenagers today. And what positive action then gave me was a chance and an opportunity, and I grabbed that with both hands and foot to pull myself out of my circumstances. I went back to evening school. I did additional courses. It was great in terms of getting mentoring, seeing black and brown people in positions of leadership, which I hadn't seen. It was also something as in terms of my redemption something that was focused in the community with Black lives that was central to that. Looking at the statistics, this was at the end of the 80s, a time of inner city riots or stroke uprisings, which we'd seen in St. Paul's, we'd seen throughout the country in my home city where I was born, in not far from where I was born in Tottenham. We'd seen it in Brixton and Toxteth, across the range of these forged and sus laws, police and interrogation. So out of that, in those housing estates and the drug dealings that were going on, and the sink estates that they were disgracefully called, blighted, forgotten estates, was things that I had learned, and my street skills suddenly were something of value alongside the new knowledge that I learned from my colleagues.
So we took you at that point, we placed you in the Harcliffe area office. It was just after the decentralisation of housing, or shortly after that. So I wonder if you can just reflect on what that experience of going to an estate like Harcliffe for yourself to kind of really cut your teeth in the housing management world.
As you can see, I'm going slightly grey, so I've forgotten quite a lot, and I write now, and I write about I write about the things to remember the past and remember what we've forgotten. And I have to go in some deep and dark places growing up in the estate and face this racist abuse in Lawrence Weston, as well as just simple things like people providing food for us, and playing at Avon Boys in Lawrence Weston now, where and adults then caring for us and looking after us. So it was a whole mix of those things. Going to Harcliffe then was, it's the south of Bristol. It's like the deep south now. It was where, we were no angels, as I've written, but it was a place where black men feared to tread in the south of Bristol. And working there, it was like, yeah, great, I've got something. I'm going to pull myself out. And then they said Harcliffe, and oh my God, I've already grown up in one white area, and because of I was becoming I was termed then as militant, but just reasserting my own black identity and not being wanted to be my hair touched, or being called a N-word or worse, or and being violently attacked on a couple of occasions. I wasn't keen to go in such that area, but the area was by and large very welcoming, and as I said, the same skill set of knowing how an estate works. There's always a Mr. Big somewhere on an estate. There is the legal traffic, the cash flow problems, borrowing £10 off a friend one day, lending it back to someone else the next. All of those things enabled me to that estate, and both in Harcliffe and Withywood were places that I still fondly remember.
And you had some great trainers there and some great mentors as well, I think, not just Carrie Pooler, I think, who was the area manager there, but Dave.
We had Carrie Pooler, we had Fred Semple, there was Richard, there was Graham Sims, who then became chief exec. There was people like Roy Irwin and Ian Crawley came a lot later. There were Pete David and Dave Lewis, but there were also black and Asian workers there. Dave One, Ebony Marriott, and looking up to say, well, I could be like that one day. And they, they wore suits and good clothes, and that was, and so that was just modelling that behaviour. These tiny little things that people take for granted. I now own my home, so I come from a place of privilege now that you just take for granted. You don't realise these crumbs of comfort, as they were then, all make up part of the jigsaw in terms of a resettlement and moving forward.
So you went through that Harcliffe experience, the baptism of fire, but obviously, as you've said, there are lots of things there which weren't coming as surprises to you. You had that really positive space in the area office as well to develop your skills. And then you went off to actually do, I think like a lot of our trainees, the positive action trainees back then, to a fairly meteoric sort of rise in terms of your housing career. And it wasn't long before you were an area housing manager running an entire part of the city yourself. Can you just tell us a bit about what that experience was like for you?
That was probably some of the kind of biggest journeys in life, because first of all, I had to then getting a white collar job after working on buildings and being unemployed. As I said, 3 million unemployed during the 80s. was one thing. So I didn't know how to work a photocopy. I had plenty of knowledge. I read lots, but never used a photocopy in my life. Or would I? And, I didn't. I still remember the person's reaction now, and they calmly just showed me, and then like everything, I picked it up. But very soon, and then in those days, and this we'll probably get into the things about where housing's going now, but I picked up I had a lot of community skills. Engagement with local communities was from the community, and that's what enamoured me. I then had to cross over into management, or I was asked to, whether that's something I wanted to consider. And that was, again, another divide. When I lived on the estate in Lawrence Weston, some friends stopped talking to me. They were one rung above the police and taxman. Then you had the housing officers. They were hated back then when we grew up, because they used to house us for debt. They used to look down on us when we used to. And I vowed, if I ever got into those circumstances, that my staff and the teams that I worked in and within and then later managed would never be like that, but we'd always be respectful. And it was great that we won awards from that. But then I took my courses in supervision. I stood in for somebody, and it was clear that I had some leadership qualities, and then went to management, but I also backed that up with counselling courses. I was getting involved, as I say, in domestic abuse, racial harassment, child abuse in terms of rehousing and resettlement. A lot of core skills that housing officers even today have to deal with. People don't understand that, and it's worked well for me later in life, because I'm multi-skilled. That was embedded in terms of what we do.
And I remember you had a bit of a reputation as an area housing manager, where all the people who just didn't fit in anywhere else, or other area teams were having a struggle to manage, they'd sort of send them down to you to sort them out. How did that experience feel?
It was. I used to joke. People talk about institutional racism within organisations, and we had it then because we all paid the same. But I used to call our team the misfits, and I used to go into teams, and it used to be me and the cleaner, who had only black, Asian, minority, ethnic representatives. And by the end, especially when I worked at Frisch Ponds, a place that I hold dearly, also worked at Barton Hill and Easton and Hembury. But particularly in the Fish Ponds team, where we won the awards, and some particularly big turnaround in what we had to do. It ended up 53% black, Asian, minority, ethnic in a city of 15%, and I think around about 12% within the Bristol City Council. And it was people who'd been suspended, who were off sick, who were so-called difficult and hard to manage. And I just provided an environment from all the skills that I had. And again, I came from a low skill base, a knowledge base, but because of both the academic courses, and I remember the course that you sent, and I still got the paperwork at home today, where we had black managers in housing, and I was like, you might as well talk about black unicorns, like the black president of the United States, which I was later wonderful to witness, a manager. But I became that, and I remember them telling us that these are the problems you're going to face from both black staff, in terms of they're going to be to what they're going to be like towards you, and also from white staff who are not going to respect your authority, and how you're going to handle those situations. I was like, I just want to get to here. They were talking up there, but they were the ones who were correct, along with yourselves and Rachel and Ray Safi, and building that whole organisation to make that pathway to where we actually got to.
And then you went out of that space and took a leading role in terms of race equality in the city, in the housing field as well. And I mean, what was that like as a challenge, moving out of the sort of the management of an area office into dealing with this big existential issue across the city?
Well, that was, I was fortunate because I had 3 different spells, and again, we had some enlightened leadership within the council, and people headhunted me to said that you've got the ability to have this role for a short period of time. I think it was the first time I covered maternity leave, but also within that department there were excellent leaders: Jackie Canham, Kerbal Shagil, David Harris, Munira Ahmed, then later went on to, and they had worked on from organisations such as Bristol Race Equality Council. It was a whole network of support to the voluntary sector, And it was working symbiotically in hand in hand, whether that was local communities or working with social services, the schools, the police. That was invaluable. Multidisciplinary working in tackling social problems. And just watching those area managers and their briefs were as wide as portfolios of almost like mini governments, if you like, because they had housing, but they would have their range into things like drugs and education, because that's how important housing is. Your early start in that will affect your life and how you're lived and raised, right from your school to how you eat, in terms of, well, we had clean, green and green in terms of one of the schemes that I used to do in terms of recycling, right the way through to perhaps getting a foothold in home ownership.
And I mean, you sort of alluded to it at the very start of the conversation, bringing us right up to date now. Fall of the Colston statue, Black Lives Matter, etc. I wonder, from your point of view, looking back in the 90s, the time where the issues around, the daily issues around institutional racism were things you were facing on a daily basis. What is your reflection now of where Bristol is as a city in terms of that agenda?
Well, one of the things, and I'm a consultant now, and that gave me the bedrock, the roles that I provided within housing, wrote race equality strategies. One of the earlier things I had to do was put response back to the Macpherson report on behalf of housing, and put steps into how to tackle that. And it was always, how do we provide solutions for doing that? First of all, understanding what there is such a thing as institutional racism, structural racism, systematic racism that we call it now. I can't believe we're still having some of those conversations. They even predate, my life in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But this historical link, which led further into my next career in writing and as a historian and lecturing, and certainly using arts and culture as that, and that telling stories that you need to look back into the history, whether it's the Scarman report in the 80s, whether it was the murder of Stephen Lawrence and the Macpherson report then in the 90s, go into the changes in legislation away from race into on this homogenous group in terms of the equalities. Race is central to some of these themes, and there are specific needs of those communities that keep recurring time in and time on, going back to the first time that when Black Lives Matter began to matter, when they started tossing my ancestors across over the ocean off the boats back then. So that's the historical context leading to today, and that's where it leads to people like the top of the Colston statue and speak. Today is the new name of Bristol Beacon, and we can start again and shine a light on some of those key issues and tackle their root causes, because otherwise we're really just fiddling in the waysides, and our children will be trying to pick up the embers of this, as they are trying to do today, in terms of getting to the root causes of the structural and systematic problems that we have today.
I mean, it does seem sometimes our history just repeats itself in these wicked loops. I remember having a conversation with you back in 93, 94, just when you got your first job in housing, to say that, by the time we reach the end of the 90s, wouldn't it be fantastic that there'd be no more need for something like a positive action programme, and how wrong we were. 20 years on, we're still seeing some of those challenges, even though obviously there have been also big improvements. There also are still these fundamental challenges that you've just alluded to. Absolutely.
I thought there would have, it would have been overtaken, or there wouldn't be the need, or we'd have fulfilled the role. But looking back to 20, 30 years ago, it was 91 when I first started my positive action scheme, January 1991. I know of no other scheme in those 30 years as that great success of training, on-the-job learning, the college education, and then giving you the skills and the confidence and belief that you can go and grow further. And the other thing would be, in terms of even going back in time in terms of priority estates and the intensified local housing, we're making sure that there are unemployment clubs and job skills, maternity clubs. Kids for the Children. We took people from the States, took them out to Wookey Hall. I was driving minivans.
Yeah.
You know, because
The first time they'd been out of Bristol or seen the countryside even, yeah. So
raise the money locally, put the bids in, funding, and so forth. And the City Council, in terms of somewhere like SARI, support against racist incidents, racial harassment at the home, those root causes, those small little pockets of money, whether it's positive action, SARI, unemployment schemes that turned into employment schemes, are vital at the local authority and housing associations that play a key role in terms of providing.
Yeah, and I just wondered, the last question really, and we could talk all day about some of these issues that you've raised, but just to kind of give an opportunity for the folk listening to this to think about what's next really for Bristol. What are the challenges in the context of social housing and housing provision? What do you see as the main challenges or the main issues on the horizon over the next, say, I don't know if you can even look beyond the next 5 or 10 years within the housing field?
The immediate challenges are all around COVID, but not solely within COVID. It's just what that ricochets in. It just means that the blight and the access to be it or education or economy or employment is longer. And that's all revolves around key housing issues. I'd like to see more community engagement and go back to some of those issues and let community solve some of those problems, and also look wider. I love some of them. I've been working with ACH and in terms of a range of their refugees and working on a load of arts and culture and getting their voices and upskilling them in terms of employment. Because it worked for me, I'm a firm and owner, a believer of to take down systems. You need that economic racism challenge to be at the centre of things, and giving people education and employment and opportunity, either through higher education, further education, or through jobs and apprenticeships, needs to go hand in hand with any economic model in terms of turning around communities. It has to be at the central cause. I believe arts and culture and the environment are just two things that are key in terms of assisting in that challenge, alongside the COVID-19 challenges that we face.
Okay, Roger Griffiths, thank you very much.